we'll use the Ola $100 million investment to actually scale up supply very, very rapidly, so that at the end of this year, you should see a Vogo scooter at every corner of the city, right? Customers should be able to just look out their window, see a scooter, use it for any possible purpose that they have. Hi, I'm Anand Ayyadurai, founder and CEO of Vogo. Welcome to Backstage with Millionaires. I would like to walk you through my journey, starting from my graduation to my stints in the startup world and then building my own company, Vogo. The first time I thought about doing something of my own was back when I was 23 during my masters. Me and a classmate of mine were talking about doing a travel aggregation platform. We spent around 3 to 4 months thinking through how it would work, talked to a bunch of customers, consulted professors, but the time wasn't right. We couldn't see how we could make money of that model, and that's an idea we abandoned. Me and Salil keep talking about it even to this day. Post that, after I finished my masters, I started my career in a large traditional pharma company. A lot of learnings there around how larger companies work, what they're good at, a lot of basic foundations on how sales, marketing, strategy and analytics work. So learned a lot of things in the first 2 years, but always very hungry to enter technology, the whole consumer internet space that was happening in 2010, 2011, all of those industries were growing very, very rapidly. The first time I heard about Flipkart was when I'm a huge reader of epic fantasy. The first time I heard about Flipkart was when there was a 10th book in a large epic fantasy series and I couldn't find it anywhere in India. Right? I went to every bookstore in Bangalore, couldn't find it. Googled it, found something called Flipkart, right? And I ordered, didn't expect it to come, and it came the next day, right? And that got me really, really interested in understanding what e-commerce could do in India, what we could how large it could become, right? Because if a customer who knows nothing about e-commerce gets such an experience, imagine how millions of Indians and billions of Indians would actually use a service like this. So that's serendipitously I started to reach out to people in Flipkart, and within a few days somebody from Flipkart reached out to me for a job, and that was super exciting. I obviously spent almost 2 weeks interviewing with them and immediately joined them a month or two later after that first order with Flipkart, right? And I think that was one of the turning points for me in terms of my own startup journey, right? Flipkart was a very, very aggressive company. The moment I came in, they threw me over the deep end. They put me in charge of launching televisions, and that we tried to do that in almost 30 days within me joining the company. And obviously I knew nothing about e-commerce, nor about televisions, right? So it was very interesting for me to actually build out my team, at the same time launch that category, make it successful, cater to building a strong customer experience. So a lot of learning in the first 3 months. It's like when you're a kid and you're swimming, they just throw you over the deep end and that's how you learn, right? I think that happened a lot over the first 6 months to 1 year. And that's when I developed a lot of thesis around how companies are built, how important growth is for anybody in a company, right? So whether it's me as a founder of a company or for employees, startups actually give you that experience of being able to really learn a lot in a very short period of time, right? So in 2012, again, I revisited what I wanted to do during my masters and started to think about doing something of my own, which would be as large as Flipkart one day, right? And even larger maybe. So that's the point when started to think about doing a bunch of things on my own, started to study what's happening out there in the space, think about what kind of problem would actually appeal to me. Post that, I spent a couple of years working in other startups as well, housing.com, Brainvalley based out of Chennai. But fundamentally in 2012 was when that Eureka moment struck us that I could actually do something of my own as well, right? It took me time to actually get around to doing it, but it fundamentally stemmed from the fact that my co-founders, we started to talk about what really excites us as a problem statement. And transportation was one of those problems which is really, really broken in India, right? There are 15 ways that you can use to travel from point A to point B, but none of them are very consistent in terms of their experience. Public transport in India is not there yet. It's going to take a lot of time for people to use public transport as the first means of transport. It's not really about affordability, it's more about accessibility. Is there a bus or a metro station always available within 1 kilometer of where you are? Not yet. It will be one day, but not yet. And hence what a lot of people do is they buy their own scooters, they buy their own cars, and they and hence vehicle ownership just starts to go up in India. But most of the time these vehicles are actually just standing there on the streets, they're not really being used. So when me and my two co-founders started to talk about what kind of business we wanted to build, right? We went back to thinking about what our own experiences have been. And fundamentally, there were 2-3 experiences which we had it in common, right? One of them was the fact that all of us had, and that's actually applies to me personally as well, that when I first moved to Bangalore, for almost a year, I was either carpooling or using autos, right? And this was back in 2009, 2010. And fundamentally, that created a lot of frustration with how your daily commute was and how much time you had to spend on it, and the fact that it was not predictable at any point in time. After a year and a half of this was when I actually went out and just bought my own motorcycle and said, I don't want to deal with this on a day-to-day basis. Me going to office and coming back, me going for short trip to MG Road should not be a challenge or should not be a daily stress inducer for me, right? And that was one of the experiences which sort of triggered this. In the case of my other 2 co-founders, and again applies to me as well, when we were back in college, right? The reason, for example, why a college student or why a first jobber also buys a scooter is because he gets frustrated with the fact that he has to depend either on his family or depend on public transport to get around, right? And which is not really accessible on the time. And hence, the first thing that he actually purchases is a scooter, right? And that's where these 2-3 experiences sort of drove us looking at these college students as a fundamental first customer to basically start with, and the fact that we did this business also is driven from the fact that all 3 of us actually even drive scooters today, right? Though it's been like 10 years since you started working, I think it's still the best way to get around. But you really don't need to own it, right? And if you didn't need to own it, then why did we actually, over the last 5 years, you would have serviced it, you would have had it towed, you would have a lot of problems over the last 5 years. Why actually should people own scooters in the first place? That's where we sort of, this whole thing as a direction came from. And then over a period of time, it grew, right? We first started with campus students, then we started with first jobbers, then we started looking at metros and buses as, linking public transport to private transport, right? Somebody gets on at a metro, somebody gets on a bus stop, can I just walk up to a scooter and then use it to cover the last mile or the first mile? This is the third thing we started to look at, and then it started to become much more universal, right? So the college student became an early adopter, but over a period of time now what I've seen is that this is actually universal. Anybody in a household who does not have 2 scooters or 3 scooters already will want to use this as a product. There are 20 million scooters being purchased in India every year, right? Those scooters are primarily bought as a commodity product so that people can move from point A to point B. People buy high-end motorcycles as a way to, own something, right? So my co-founder Paddy just bought himself a Royal Enfield last week, right? So that's because he wanted a high-end motorcycle which he wants to drive. But when people buy a scooter, it's a lot more about how do I go from point A to point B, right? And that's something that shared mobility can really, really solve. We think we now have the ability to really put hundreds of thousands of scooters out there in our cities. And that fundamentally does 2-3 things, right? It reduces the need for people to actually own an asset. Which means that for maybe every 10 vehicles that people are buying, you need to actually, we would buy 1 vehicle and 10 customers would share that asset. It reduces congestion significantly on the roads, because a lot of congestion in India today is about parking, right? And if a lot of these assets are bought and then parked on the roads or parked in a society or parked anywhere, which is at the end of the day public shared land, right? That in turn is also adding to congestion, right? And simplifying that is very, very important. The third other very large problem statement that we solve for is the fact that because public transport is not complete yet in India, right? What tends to happen is that an Indian pays a lot more for his daily transportation than anyone else, right? And our wallet share for transport is highest compared to almost every other developed and developing country. And that's huge, right? And that's the problem we're going after. People should not have to spend a large portion of their daily spend just on transportation. It should be very, very simple. It should be very, very accessible. It should be very, very affordable, right? When we thought about what will get us from 200 scooters to 200,000 scooters or 2 million scooters, right? It boiled down to hardware, it boiled down to automating this whole service and saying that it's a self-serve service rather than somebody handing over a key. So we originally started this business. It was an app-based booking, but it was a guy handing over the key to you and you take the key and go somewhere and come back, right? But that's a business which you cannot put in tens of thousands of points across the city. You can't say at every corner there will be a guy handing over a key, right? And that's where we started to build hardware as a parallel track. We continue to do what we're doing and scale that up in a small way. But at the same time, we said we will build this hardware and this is what will enable us to go from 200 to 20,000 and to 200,000, so on and so forth. We spent around 6 months building a team, working with multiple vendors, building it in-house, and finally we actually built a lot of the technology in-house, right? And this ranges over a multiple set of things. The first is basically the whole locking unlocking mechanism. How does a customer walk up to a vehicle, scan a QR code and actually just start the vehicle, right? It needs to be very, very simple. Today we have an OTP based system where a customer has to press an OTP, get the key and start his vehicle. But at the same time we are now working on ways to basically make it just a one-click solution, the way you could think of how in Amazon you just click a button and you can actually finish your booking. In the same way, you just press a button on your app and the vehicle will unlock. There's no OTP, there's no keypad, there's nothing, right? And you just walk up to the vehicle, you can start it. This is something that we have now actually piloted, and over the next few months you would see every one of our vehicles will be one click. And that actually is an innovation which has been done in-house. So we built a lot of very interesting technology here. I think that's fundamentally very unique about our startup, that a lot of things had to be built from scratch. IoT for cycles or cars is actually available in the industry, but for scooters had to be built. So us, other players in this market have actually approached this problem from scratch, right? How do you ensure that the vehicle can be tracked at any point in time in Indian conditions where a customer could drop it in a basement, right? A bike battery has a very low voltage. When a bike battery has a very low voltage, how do you essentially ensure that still any electronics that you put does not drain the bike battery and shut down the vehicle? That's actually a very interesting engineering problem. And when the bike battery does shut down, you need to have other communication systems in place so that you continue to get the location of the vehicle even though the bike is off, right? So how do those communication systems get powered? That's another problem statement that we're working on. Because this is a self-serve service, right? By nature, people are going to abandon the vehicle at some point in time. The vehicle is going to run out of fuel. How do you know how much fuel is there in your vehicle at any point in time? This is another, again, very interesting engineering problem. The scooters that we have today, the gasoline scooters even electric scooters are not actually designed from scratch for having a lot of this hardware in. So we actually had to do a lot of these experiments ourselves, learn how to calibrate these sensors, build all of this from scratch. And that actually has been the core of what we've built, right? So when you sort of scale up as well, the fact that you know where your scooter is in good condition, it is fueled, knowing that sitting here when there are hundreds of thousands of scooters out there is what is crucial to actually scale up a business like this. And a lot of our efforts are actually focused on it. Most of our team is actually focused on it today. Whether it is product, whether it is hardware, we have a whole floor of hardware engineers, which includes mechanical engineers, embedded engineers, and the actual electronics engineers who are building PCBs and designing PCBs around it. So that whole piece is very core to the business. We've done multiple iterations. Like I said, we started with this whole OTP setup. Now we're moving to one click. Even in terms of communication, we've really grown from where we are more a year back. So it's a continuous iteration in terms of how strong you actually build something like this. We have very strong technology, but this needs to be perfect, right? For a customer, the customer doesn't care about what is the underlying technology. The customer cares about whether every vehicle that he sees out there, is it available for him to book, right? We aren't there yet, but everything that we do today in the company is actually built around making sure that if you have 100 scooters, can you make 95% of those scooters always available to customers in perfect condition? We started to offer a service where a customer can come 24/7, can pick up the vehicle and then drop it at some other point. So people would pick us up from the metro, drop it off at a college, pick it up at their home and then drop it off at their office, right? A lot of trips basically started to increase on a per vehicle basis. People who are using us once in 2-3 weeks for more of a leisure or once in a while need started to use us on twice a week basis. They started to use on a daily basis as well. So a lot of our numbers really moved, right? And that basically gave us the ability and the confidence to say that you can take something which is in hundreds of scooters, move it to tens of thousands of scooters, and over a period of time to hundreds and thousands of scooters, right? This can be a millions of rides a day business, and a lot of early evidence is there to actually show that it can be a millions of rides a day business. So that's one large turning point, right? And when that happened, we started to scale up very rapidly. Over 2018, we scaled quite a bit. We increased our fleet by almost 15 to 20x. Our growth in terms of orders also happened 15-20x. Even in terms of employees, we were a fairly small organization. We used to work out of a house in Koramangala, and then we moved to a large office, started to get crossed 100 plus employees mark. And that's where fundamentally, when we did that very rapidly, we went from 20 employees to 100 employees in a period of 3 months, right? And when we did that, we started to see that how you manage 20 employees and how you manage 100 employees is very fundamentally different, right? So in 20 employees, it's a very small family. Maintaining that same feel when you actually move to 100 employee mark is actually very difficult. When we move to 1,000 employee and to 10,000 employee mark, it's going to be even more difficult, right? So that was one challenge we faced in the first 3 months, that we didn't know each person in the organization. Every person in the organization was not aware of why we were doing XYZ things as a company, and there were departments, there were multiple things happening at the same time. That's when we started to create a lot of processes and a lot of it's not really about HR or about human resources, but more about how do you make sure that when a person comes into the company, he knows what the values of the company are. He understands over the first month what is expected of him, over the first 3 months what is expected of him. Is his role very clearly defined? Does he know what the organization intends to do in the next 1 month, in the next 3 months, in the next 1 year? Is he empowered? Is he motivated? A lot of these initiatives around standardizing some of these things is something we've been doing over the last 3 months. It's obviously always going to be a work in progress, but we've made a lot of progress around that whole piece, right? And this is something which always calls for continuous improvement. So we're trying to follow best practices that we have seen other companies do. The companies that we have worked in before used to do a lot of things well. So how can we take practices from there and ensure that when you scale employees by 10x, when you scale the number of people working here, do they all feel like they own a small part of this company, right? And do they act in that manner? And that's something that we wanted to build. We are in progress to actually make that happen. Fundamentally, 2018 was a year of rapid scale up for us, where we have had a bunch of challenges, solved them in multiple ways. 2019 for us is going to be about how can you scale up really, really rapidly, right? We'll use the Ola $100 million investment to actually scale up supply very, very rapidly, so that at the end of this year, you should see a Vogo scooter at every corner of the city, right? Customers should be able to just look out their window, see a scooter, use it for any possible purpose that they have. That's the first objective that we have to achieve in 2019, right? In terms of where we are today, we should be hitting a total of 1 million rides by the end of this month. That's a good benchmark for us actually, and the next benchmark we'll be looking to do is to get to a total cumulative of maybe 10 million rides, right? And we expect that to happen in the next 6 months or so, right? So because growth is happening really rapidly, demand is much higher than supply today in the market, right? Even today with the smaller fleet that we have, we get demand which is almost 3 times that of supply, right? So it's a lot about can you get customers the vehicles when they want it, where they want it, right? And that's core to this business. Can you get vehicles really close to customers? Can you get them at the time they want it, whether it's a peak hour, whether it's a non-peak hour, with a limited scooter fleet, right? So this limitation on scooter fleet is something which is going to go away from this category, because we are going to be able to put hundreds of thousands of scooters in this year and the next, and that fundamentally changes the growth trajectory of a business like this, right? And a business which would grow, basically you can either add 1,000 scooters a month for the next 3 years, or you can add 10,000 scooters a month for the next 12 months, right? And we are actually in a trajectory to be able to add scooters very quickly to meet the demand that we have for our customers, right? Fundamentally, the way I think of how this business is going to grow over the next 3 to 5 years is that, like I said earlier as well, this is a lot about why do people really need to buy a scooter in a shared economy? Can it be an on-demand service that people just use to go from point A to point B, right? And when you start to think about the opportunity there, India is the largest two-wheeler manufacturer in the world. India sells around 20 million two-wheelers a year, right? And if you even touch a small fraction of that, the amount of impact you can make on how customers actually commute today is very huge. We are very excited that there is this large opportunity that we can go after and really attack in 2019, 2020 and in the years going ahead. So that's my journey, starting with my graduation, then my stint in the startup world, and then building my own company, Vogo. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share it with your friends. Happy to answer any questions you might have in the comment section. Thanks for watching.